Hi there. Have you noticed how many people are super busy at work almost all of the time? Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you have coworkers who are like that. And have you noticed how some people almost like brag about it and tend to be like seem proud of how busy they are and how much work they have to do and how many hours they have to work? It's a very common thing. It's a very common thing, and I think it's a very bad thing. And in this video, I want to talk about why that is, and why that constant busyness is actually hurting our productivity. And of course, I want to talk about how we avoid it. These are the topics I planned. What exactly does the research say? There is some fascinating research into what happens to us under time pressure when we're super busy. And spoiler, it's not pretty. I also want to talk about why this constant busyness is so rampant. Why is it so common? This is in workplaces all over the world. And in so many of them, like people are just busy, they're just slammed all the time. And then, of course, I want to talk about how do we avoid it. And I have like 5 specific tips on how we can avoid this constant busyness affecting us negatively. As I go along, ask me anything in the comments. If you're watching this live, write a comment on the webinar, and I'll be happy to answer your comments at the end of it. And if you're watching the video later, write a comment on the video, and I'll see it and respond to it. I love getting questions. Um, why are we talking about this? Well, as I said, this constant busyness is rampant. I asked my followers on LinkedIn. I have 15,000 followers on LinkedIn, and remember, these people are not the regular people. They are these are people who are interested in happiness at work. These are people who care about creating a good workplace environment, right? That's why they follow the chief happiness officer. And even among these people, 24% said they were completely slammed this week. Another 38% say were busy. They were not too bad. 28% had enough time for their work. And interestingly, 11% had too much time on their hands for the work they had. That's an interesting discovery, and we may return to that in a later video. So this fits very well with my sense that like a very large percentage of people are just completely slammed at work. They have way more tasks than they have time to do those tasks. And that is clearly not good. Why is that? Well, it can happen in any workplace, and it does happen in pretty much any workplace. And why? Well, in some cases, it's because the workplace is doing really well. You know, if business is growing, you are getting more work, more customers, more projects, more tasks, and it's hard to staff up. So for a while, you know, workloads are high, but workloads are growing, but staff is not growing. So people get super busy. It can also happen when the business fails. Business is going down. Maybe there are layoffs, and suddenly fewer people have to do the same amount of work, and that creates this insane business. Um, in some workplaces, even though business isn't necessarily growing that rapidly, performance goals are just increased every single year. Have you noticed that? That in many companies, like every single year, you have some KPIs for the amount of work you have to do, and it just goes up year by year by year, with no increase and with no increase in resources. I've definitely seen that in many workplaces. Changes create a increased workload. Let's say you get a new IT system, and for a while you have to work in a new system that you're not used to. That creates increased workload. Maybe you change processes. Maybe your company expands into new markets, new products, new ways of working, and all that can create an increased workload and more busyness. But I do think that the number one reason why we see this constant busyness in so many workplaces is just that it's a cultural myth that it's a good thing, right? That if people are busy, if we give them ambitious goals for how much work they should do, if they're always, lagging a little bit behind, surely that's good for their performance. Surely that will make them work harder and smarter to achieve these overly ambitious goals. And I'm here to tell you that that is just not how it works. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite. And I've seen this vicious cycle in so many workplaces. We have high workloads for whatever reason, business is up, business is down, whatever. Um, this we know from the research, and we're going to go into exactly why, but we know that these high workloads do not cause people to perform better. In fact, they cause a lot of stress, uncertainty, unhappiness, feelings of inadequacy, and increased mental load. And all of these things taken together then lower people's productivity. They hurt your productivity. And of course, when people's productivity hurts, their output falls, and we fall even more behind. We have even higher workloads, and then you get this vicious cycle. It is. I've seen that in so many workplaces. I work with a huge Danish insurance company, and they were doing their business was going better than ever. They had record profits every single year, but the problem was that they had not increased the workforce to match that, so people had higher and higher workloads. And what ended up happening was that it caused so much stress and burnout among the employees that actually, so many employees were suddenly sick, increased absenteeism, and that hurt their productivity, and that again created increased workloads and even more busyness for the employees. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way. I recognize that businesses are not predictable. You can't necessarily predict your workload next month, next quarter, next year. So maybe workloads will suddenly rise, but there are ways of handling that do not make people unhappy at work, that do not cause this vicious cycle. Um, we have a stress researcher in Denmark called Bobby Zachariae who's looked into this, and he says that constant busyness in itself does not necessarily make people stressed and burned out, as long as they still experience happiness at work. So we're going to talk about how we do that. And of course, happiness at work is super important because we know from all the research that happy people do better jobs and happy companies perform better. Here's a quote from Kerry Cooper from the University of Manchester. I saw a concrete example of that. I did a workshop some years ago for a company in Denmark called SOS International. They're a call center for travel insurance. So if you're traveling somewhere and your rental car breaks down, or suddenly you break your leg and you need a car mechanic or a hospital or a doctor or whatever, um, they can help you. You call into this number and they can help you get a car mechanic, get a doctor, get plane tickets home, get whatever you need through your travel insurance. They work all over Scandinavia. They have a call center here in Copenhagen with Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Finnish employees. I did a number of workshops for this company. And I asked the employees, so when was the happiest time you had at work? When was working here the most fulfilling, the most fun, the most interesting? And I was kind of shocked at the answer because they all said the same thing, which was right after the tsunami in Thailand and Indonesia in 2001. And of course, being a travel agency, they were swamped with work. So many people had been hurt. So many people had lost their belongings. So many people could not find their relatives. So they had never, ever been busier. And yet, thinking back at this time, the employees in this company remember it as the most fulfilling time in their jobs. And we're going to talk about how they did that, how they took that, what could have been the most stressful time, and transformed it into the most, I want to say happy because this was a tough situation, but the most fulfilling and the most meaningful time at work for these employees. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video. Um, I think the main problem here, so why is busyness so bad? Well, it's bad because it makes us unhappy at work. That's part of the reason. And if you know any of our work, you know that our theory of what makes us happy at work is that it's not about the perks or, a gym in the office or a massage or, yoga or whatever. The things that make us happy at work are results in relationships, doing great work together with great people, knowing that I'm good at my job. I can, fulfill my goals. I can create meaningful differences. And I like the people I work with, relationships. That's what really makes people happy at work. If you go to the core of the research in happiness at work, and it's clear that these two are very much harmed by constant busyness. I mean, it's obvious that being super busy hurts your feeling of results, right? Because if you are, maybe you're doing great work, right? You're doing more work than ever. You're doing better work than ever. It's just that your goals are even bigger. So you should have achieved this much. You only achieved this much. It's hard to feel good about that when your goal was to do maybe 10% more. And that happens in so many companies when we get busy, is that what we keep communicating to employees is, here is all the work you still have not completed, right? I worked with another insurance company in Denmark where they were again falling way behind. It was a super busy period. And every single week, the employees of this team got an email with how many cases they were now behind. And they were working so hard. They were doing more work than ever. They were actually completing more cases than ever. But because there was just, way more work coming in, they were still falling behind. And that made them feel really inadequate. It made them feel very unhappy and stressed at work. And I think it's worth pointing out that this, the amount of work they do is somewhat within their control. If they work smarter, if they optimize their processes, if they help each other, they can do more work. But they have absolutely no control over the amount of work that comes in. In this case, there were a lot of storms that came across Denmark that summer, and they can't control the weather. But every time there's a storm that comes in, people's house basements get flooded, people's house roofs get damaged, that kind of thing, right? So, and I think it's super unfair that we keep, beating people over the head with all the work they haven't done when they can't control how much work comes in. So what we did specifically with this insurance company was we focused on the work they had completed. We told them this is not fair, and then we got them to every week we got them to send an email to the team with, here's how much work you've completed. Here's how much of these cases, these insurance cases, you've actually fulfilled, finished. And that number grew week by week because they helped each other and they were smart and they were like very good at their jobs. And that completely moved their focus. And what actually happened was that this allowed them to work better. It maintained their feeling of results. And after a while, they could actually dig into that, huge caseload and chip away at that and get back to a normal workload again. So this is my first tip for how we stay happy even though we're busy, is that we focus so much on the work we've completed instead of constantly beating people over the head with, here's what you should have done. And it doesn't need to be complicated. This is from a client of ours in Copenhagen, where they just, again, used a whiteboard to track it, right? Every day, somebody goes into their case handling system and says, how many tasks have we completed today? And uploads this to the system. And otherwise, the system only told them, again, how many cases are we behind? And so many people do that. Just me personally, I have a to-do, an online project management system where I track all my tasks, everything I have to do. But crucially, what I do once a week, I actually have a task to remind me to do that, is to go into that system and look at all the tasks I've completed in the last week. Because otherwise, the to-do list, how does a to-do list work? As soon as you mark a task as completed, it's gone. So your to-do list only has all the things you haven't yet done and should feel bad about. So once a week, I actually go into that system and see, oh my God, I did this, I did that, and remind myself that I'm actually doing a lot of good work. So if we're not careful, being busy hurts our feeling of results. And what we can do is we can over communicate the results we do achieve instead of hitting people over the head with the results they haven't yet done. But as I said, there are two main things that make us happy at work: results and relationships. And it turns out from the research that being busy also hurts your relationships. The most fascinating piece of research I've seen ever in this field, I think, is called From Jerusalem to Jericho. And in this study, they brought volunteers into the lab and they had them do some tasks like fill out this form, yada, yada, whatever. They're sitting in a room doing this. And then they're told, thank you for completing this task. The experiment will continue in the next room. Please exit through this door, go down the hall into the next room, and a researcher will meet you there. And then the real experiment actually takes place in the hallway on the way to the other room, because there's an actor lying on the ground pretending to have passed out. And then the real experiment is, will the person stop and help? Right? And they're given this message in 3 different ways. So some people are told, okay, the experiment will continue in the other room. Please go there now. And some people are told, in addition to that, they're told, and by the way, we're running a little late. Please hurry. And then the last group are told, oh my God, what are you doing here? You should have been in the other room 10 minutes ago. Run. Yeah. And then you see, depending on how they got this message, do people stop and help? And there were, like I said, 3 different conditions. There was the people who were a little busy, the people who were somewhat busy, and the people who were very busy. So the question is, and you can try and guess, in each of these conditions, how many people stop and help? in each of the three conditions. And here's what they found in the research. Among the people who are just a little busy, 64% actually stopped and helped. So that's nice. Two out of three stop, ask this person, are you okay? Get them on their feet, get them a drink of water, whatever they need. As soon as people are just a little busy, we're running behind, please hurry. This number drops to 26%. And among the people who are super busy, what are you doing here? You should have been there 10 minutes ago. Run. It's now only 1 out of 10 who actually stops and helps somebody who's passed out on the road. You can look up the research. Here's the citation for that article. I think it's absolutely fascinating. So this very clearly shows that when we're put under time pressure, um, we become more focused on ourselves, our own needs, our own tasks, our own goals, our own objectives, whatever we're doing, and less focused on the people around us. There's a very good chance that the people who are super busy might not even have seen that person because they're so focused on getting to wherever they were going. And the same thing happens in the workplace. We know that if we put a team or a person under time pressure, they become way less likely to help each other, less likely to collaborate, and more likely to just hunker down and focus on their own work. And that is not the behavior we want in a workplace. We want people to help each other. We want people to take time to be there for each other. Um, so that clearly shows how time pressure hurts our workplace relationships. So my tip here is that especially when the workplace is busy, we need to focus on creating and maintaining good workplace relationships. So there still needs to be time to chat to a coworker, have a lunch break together, have a coffee break together, to just connect as coworkers. We can't just be all work, 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 work. Because as we know from the research, if people don't have good workplace relationships, they're unhappy at work and they do worse work. They become less productive. I saw a specific example of that from one of our clients. We've done a lot of work with IKEA. And again, I asked some of these IKEA staff, tell me about something that made you happy at work. And one of them said that she was in the decoration team, so the people actually set up all the internal stuff in the warehouse themselves, in the warehouse itself, and they were setting up the new summer decoration that was supposed to open tomorrow. So they were super busy. I mean, warehouse opens at 9. It's got to be ready by then, so they're pulling on all nighter. And in the middle of this, when they're like busy dragging things back and forth, making signs, setting up things, her manager comes and like taps her on the shoulder and says, "Please come with me." And he brings her into a meeting room. And in there, they had cake, they had coffee, and all her coworkers were there because it was her birthday, and they remembered. And like it, and she told me that it made her so happy that in the middle of the busiest day of the year for these people, they took like 20 minutes to celebrate her birthday, have a slice of cake, have a cup of coffee, sing a birthday song, and then they all went back to work. That's the kind of thing I mean, and that's especially when we're busy, we need to remember to create and maintain good workplace relationships in our teams, between coworkers, between managers and employees, that kind of thing. And it's not our natural tendency. Our natural tendency, as I said, is when we come under time pressure, we focus more on ourselves. Um, so being busy hurts our feeling of results. Being busy hurts our relationships. And a third reason why being busy is so bad, time pressure is so bad, is that time pressure tends to make us act unethically. When people are under time pressure, they are more likely to lie and cheat and steal and, in general, act unethically. And there are a ton of studies showing this, from psychology and sociology. And this is not great in the workplace, right? I mean, again, you want people to work well together. You don't want, this coworker to undermine that coworker, or to take credit for somebody else's work, or to, bend the laws. Hopefully, you don't want your employees to bend the laws to achieve their results. You really, really don't want that. So just be aware that when people are under time pressure, when they're super busy, they are more likely to lie, steal, and cheat and act unethically. I think a fantastic example of that is Enron, where they had these massive time pressure. People were always super busy, and that was part of the culture they created in order to make lying and stealing and cheating and breaking the law perfectly natural, even accepted and celebrated within the organization. Enron was, of course, the biggest financial fraud yet so far. There might be bigger ones coming. There have been bigger ones coming since that, actually. That was reason number 3. It makes us more likely to act unethically. And the final reason I'll mention last reason why being busy is so bad is that it makes you more stupid. I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. I want to recommend one of my absolute favorite nonfiction books of all time. It's called Scarcity. And in Scarcity, they examine what when you lack something, when you're no you know you're lacking like money or time or whatever. What does that do to you? They look at poverty a lot, and it's really scary what poverty does to your mental faculties, to your mental resources. But they also look at time pressure. So they gave people various cognitive tasks, and some people were given ample time to solve it, and some people were given like tight deadlines. And it turns out that when you're given a tight deadline, when you're under time pressure, your IQ drops significantly. Your mental load increases, and your mental resources drop, and you perform significantly worse on various cognitive tasks. You're dumber when you're busy. So again, do we really want to do that to our employees? Do we want to put them under constant time pressure and thereby make them more stupid? I don't think we do. I think we need to avoid that. So those are the four reasons why being busy is so bad. It hurts our results, relationships, makes us lie, steal, and cheat, and it makes us more stupid. We make worse decisions under time pressure. They did some fascinating studies where they also found that people with a full bladder made worse decisions. Oh yeah, and by the way, another result from the scarcity book is that when you're under time pressure, you become worse at managing your time. That's not great either. That's not great either. Okay, so I've given a couple of tips on how to fix it, but I want to give a couple more. But before we do that, what do we not do? What should we not do? So let me puncture a couple of myths here. One myth is that when we're busy, what we need to do is work longer hours, right? It just makes sense, right? I mean, if we need to do 10% more work, let's work 10% more hours. Makes sense, right? No, it does not. And I have an hour and a half long video where I talk about the culture for work and how it actually turns out that working more hours lowers performance. I just want to mention one study. I really like this one. They took a group of developers who were working 40 hours a week. They had like a pretty constant output week after week after week. And then they moved those developers. They were on a deadline. They were coding a game, moved them to a 60-hour work week. And what turned out, you can see in the first few weeks, it turns out they actually did more work. But then after about 4 weeks of working 60 hours a week, it turns out they now did less work. It's not just that their productivity fell, their total output fell. So they are now getting less work done, even though they were working 50% more hours. And this relationship has been found in so many studies. This goes all the way back to World War One and munitions factories in the UK, where they found that they wanted to produce as many grenades and munitions as possible. So they moved the workers to in some cases 100-hour work week, and it turned out they now got less work done than they did in just 40 hours a week. So that's definitely one thing we should not do, just increase work hours. And then another myth is that if we're super busy, well, then we need to focus on work, right? We can't do anything to focus on well-being or happiness. There is no time for breaks, no time for relaxations. We need to cancel vacations, that kind of thing. And that's just stupid as well. I would say it's the opposite, especially when the workplace is busy. We need to focus on making people happy at work. We need to focus on creating results, relationships. And I want to talk about some ways to do that. Um, and the whole thing about cutting out breaks and cutting out vacations and days off and that kind of thing. Let's call people in on weekends. Let's call people in on their vacations so they can work more. Is a terrible idea. Because what we know from the research is also that temporary busyness is fine, but constant busyness is terrible. So being busy for a little while, let's say you have a deadline in 2 weeks and the whole team works hard to reach that deadline, that can actually be a lot of fun, provided you get to relax afterwards. So you get some time off after that. You have a period of relaxation after that. What really kills people and kills productivity is the constant busyness where you're just always behind, and it doesn't matter how effectively you work or how much you work, you're always going to be behind. And that is what a lot of people experience at work these days. So especially when we're busy, We need to, have our weekends off. We need to have our vacation time. We need to have our coffee breaks and our lunch breaks, because that is what helps us relax after the busyness. That is what helps us maintain our mental resources so we can actually do our work and not burn out. So that's tip number three. Make sure that there's still focus on happiness at work. Make still sure that people are still taking their breaks, taking their vacation time. Tip number four is super important. If we want to handle busyness well, we need top leadership to walk the talk on this. We can't have a message of take care of yourself, make sure to take breaks, make sure to recover, make sure to take days off, and then the light is always on in the boss's office. They're always working. They're sending emails late at night in the weekend, expecting a reply. That is that's just a mixed message, and it's clear what's gonna if the company says one thing but the managers do something else, it's clear what employees are gonna what they're gonna pay attention to. They're gonna see what the manager does and copy that. I talked to this manager in Denmark, CEO of a company here, who basically said he works 40 hours a week. That's his work week. And if he can't do that, then he should then he's just not good enough at delegating and managing his own time. So he definitely, we know he had young kids. He wants to be there for them. So that's super important. Another great example I saw of this is I talked to this American man who got a job as a middle manager with a Scandinavian company in Sweden. And so he comes in, he's like, I have to prove myself. So he comes into the company, he works like 60, 70 hours a week, always in the office, sending emails late at night, that kind of thing. And then after a couple of weeks, his boss calls him into their office, and he's like, yes, my hard work has been noticed. And then this Swedish boss tells him, listen, I've seen how much you work. Is there something wrong? Do you need help delegating your work? Do you need help prioritizing your time? What is wrong? How do we fix this? And I thought that's super interesting, right? That the company frames this as not something to be celebrated, but actually as a problem to be fixed, because that kind of thing is just not sustainable, and it's not the culture you want to spread from managers to the employees. So getting top leadership on board with this idea of not promoting constant busyness, I think, is super important. And of course, in some workplaces, you do have the opposite. You have top leadership who celebrate, almost even worship, constant busyness. And I think that, like, Elon Musk is a terrible example. He's always bragging about how much he works and sleeping in the office and that kind of thing, even though a lot of his work seems to be playing computer games and shit posting on Twitter. Right. Fifth and final tip on how to deal with this constant busyness without stressing people out and losing productivity is to focus on the meaningful work that people do. Very often when we get busy at work, we're focused on how much work we do, and we're focused on the next task, the next task, the next task, the next goal, the next KPI, whatever. And what we tend to forget is how does this work make a positive difference for someone somewhere? That's how you know the work is different. Is meaningful, is when it makes a difference for someone somewhere. So how are we helping the clients? How are we helping the environment? How are we helping our city? How are we helping the country? That is super important to bring that back. A couple of examples. I work with an IT company in Denmark, tech company in Denmark, and they actually they have their clients make videos. So they make the client film like a very simple 1-minute selfie video about how their company's work has made a difference for the client and made their business easier, more fun, more successful. I think that's a great example. I work with a production company in Denmark. They make pharmaceutical equipment, including catheters and urine bags for people in wheelchairs. And they had noticed that quality was slipping a little bit. So they brought in 2 people who are in wheelchairs to talk about these products, what they mean to them, what it means when they works, and when they work, and what it means when when these products fail, and suddenly your urine bag leaks or your catheter is not, something wrong with that, right? Just to show and they brought these 2 people in during a lunch break to talk to all of the employees on the production line about this, to show them that, what, your work is meaningful. You're not just producing widgets. You're making a product that actually helps people who really need it. And when your product is made well, it makes their lives better, it makes their day better. And when your product fails, it creates problems for real life people in the real world. And it was so interesting because they told me that after this event, the number of errors in these products just dropped, because people now focused more and they knew now that their work was meaningful. I want to go back to these are my 5 tips. I want to go back to SOS International. So this call center for travel insurance and what they did. So when they noticed that, they saw in the news that this has happened, all of these calls started flooding in. They focused a lot on results, and they did that by working really hard together. And yes, they did overwork. They did, pull together, and some of these people worked 14-hour shifts, but they knew this was temporary, and that's why it worked. They also knew that their work was meaningful. These people called in. They didn't call in for fun. They called in because they desperately needed medical care, contact with a lost with their relatives, that kind of thing. So, and they could help them with using their expertise, their knowledge, their local contacts. They could actually help these people. They also focused a lot on creating relationships, on being there for each other. One woman told me that she, again, worked a 14-hour shift. Then she went home and baked muffins for everybody, brought them back to the office. So, the people who were working had something to snag on, that kind of thing. Managers walked the talk. So the managers weren't just in their offices supervising everything. They were on the phones, making sure that they were all reducing this workload together. So this was an example of how you can be super busy and actually out of that create the most meaningful and fulfilling time in the company's history for the employees, something they look back on and remember in a positive way. Um, awesome. That again shows it's possible, shows that we can deal with constant busyness in a way that doesn't burn people out. Cool. I will now take your questions, and see if there are any questions in the chat. Hang on. All righty. Yes, there is one question, and it's a tough one. It says, "What do you do if top management all work 80-hour weeks and only celebrate and promote people who do the same?" Yeah, like I said, that is a tough one, and I think there are two ways you can go about this. One is you can go to top management and say, "Hey, this is actually bad. Here is all the research evidence showing that when we overwork people, when we make them work long hours, it actually hurts performance, and we actually end up getting less work done, being less productive, creating worse results and worse profits for the workplace." And some managers are open to that. They will, they will accept research evidence and act accordingly, and maybe change their behavior. And again, as I said, if you need all the ammo, all the research on that, I do have a 1.5 hour video. I'm going to link to that in the materials for this video. 1.5 hour video going through all of the evidence on why overwork is such a bad thing. But then, of course, there are definitely managers who are not open to persuasion, where this idea that to prove yourself you must work long hours, and they're just not open to any of the no matter how much evidence you present to the contrary, they will never ever believe you. They will never change their behavior. And if you work in an organization like that, you should quit and get out and go work for an organization that does not work its people to death. And if you need some inspiration on that, I have a 1 hour video on how to quit your job, when you should quit, and how to do it. I'll link to that as well. Great question. And yeah, like I said, there are managers who will listen. There are managers who won't. You need to figure out what kind of managers you have, and then act accordingly. Beautiful. I hope you found this interesting. It's a topic I care a lot about. If you want more information, there's a website, woohooinc.com, or a blog, positivesharing.com. Please connect on LinkedIn. Please follow me on YouTube. And of course, you can subscribe to our newsletter. I'll put that link in the video materials as well. And of course, more than anything else, if you found this super interesting, book me to speak in your organization. I'm pretty good at it, to be perfectly honest. Our last 300 talks got an average rating out of 10 of 9.6. 9.6. It's a little sad, but every time I get a 9 instead of a 10 from a company, it draws the average down. I hate that. You can read all about our talks and keynotes and workshops on woohooinc.com. So thank you so much for watching and stay happy.